Obviously, as everyone knows, this is basically a crash course in how to be a working class journalist and not like be bankrupt, basically. So as I said, obviously I'm Lauren. I've got my Twitter handle there. It's not just a plug. You can like contact me if you want, like on Twitter to ask any questions outside of this, and I'm like more than happy to help. And I've also got my email address on like a later slide. So just if you want to ask anything, just do. So as I said, I'm currently doing my master's and the NCTJ diploma, which if you're not sure what that is, it's basically like the industry qualification that you kind of need to get a job. And I've been freelancing since I was 16 years old. I'm now coming up to 22. I've had so much unpaid experience. So I've got loads of comments about that too. And I'm now currently working for Sky News on Saturday, but also throughout the week because that's just the way it works in this industry, I suppose. But the question that I would ask if I was in your shoes is, how have I afforded to do all of this? So I'll be sort of transparent and just explain it all. And basically, I've sort of gotten this far through bursaries. So I did my undergrad at Durham Uni, and I got £2,000 a year to basically study there because I was part of like a scheme that they ran. And I got an extra 1K in my final year because I did take up a job with my college. And I also had a part-time job alongside that. So that's how I afforded the undergrad. But MAs are like a total different kettle of fish, and you do often have to essentially fund it yourself. So that's not easy when living costs, like in Sheffield, for example, where I am, it's like about £6,000, well, just a bit over £6,000 it's going to cost just for rent alone this year. But I got a bursary from the Journalism Diversity Fund, which is part of the NCTJ, which is again like the industry sort of accreditor for journalism. And I borrow 11 grand to pay for my student finance fees. So I am in more debt, but I can actually afford to do the course because they pay for all my living costs, and they do give me a monthly sort of travel bursary as well. And the Journalism Diversity Fund, it is competitive to get on, but it's not impossible. And sort of I'll talk a bit more now about how to apply for that, and sort of my top tips. So I'll explain how the Journalism Diversity Fund works. And essentially, I think it's 3 cohorts of funding every year, but it could be more. I actually couldn't find the answer on the internet, so that's not very good research and skills from me, but I did try. And essentially, you have to submit a written application to like a series of questions on their website. So they ask like, why are you passionate about journalism? Like, what experience do you have? And I think it asked to pitch like a local news story that you'd like to report on and a national news story. So that gives you sort of the chance to show your skills if you don't sort of have that much experience. But I would say, when I now talk about what you actually need to get on, you do need proof that you're passionate about journalism, and that most often is sort of done in the form of experience. And if you wondered how to get experience, I am going to come on to that in a later slide. So essentially, you need to prove that you're passionate, and you can't just say, I'm passionate about journalism. You have to show that. So relevant experience, as we've said, is huge. And the best thing that you can do for yourself if you want to be a journalist is get as much experience as possible. Even if it means you have to start your own blog or your own podcast, like do it, because that shows initiative, and it also is something that not everyone else has done. So I did start my own podcast before I applied. And it sort of was, I did want to do my own podcast, but I also thought this is going to look quite good when I say that I've done this. And so you have to always think in your head, like, if you're going up against thousands of other people, what is going to set you apart? And it's always initiative usually that does that. So think about what you can do to be proactive yourself. And also you have to obviously prove diversity. So for me, and I'm expecting for most people on this call, like the main diversity thing that we have in common is that we're working class. So for me, I was on free school meals when I was growing up, and I genuinely couldn't afford to do what I'm doing now if I didn't get the money. So I would have just been unemployed basically, and looking for a job. And you do need the qualification to get a job. So you kind of come to a crossroads at that point. And so a bit more about the JDF is sort of, they cover living costs. They can also cover tuition fees if you go to one of the fast track courses, but you can't go to City University in London to do your master's there because they don't do the NCTJ. So that's also how we ended up at Sheffield. And they also give you sometimes travel expenses. So I get £50 a month travel expenses, which is really good. but you also get more than the money. So they do give you tip-offs for freelance opportunities. So after a couple of months that I knew that I was on the bursary scheme, they sent an email out for people wanting pictures for an article in a magazine. I sent a pitch and I got paid over 300 quid, and I got some really expensive like trainers out of it. And it was like really good because I've never been paid that much before for my writing. So you do get gigs emailed around. And if you mention that you're on the Journalism Diversity Fund, because so many people in the journalism industry actually fund that, including ITV, Sky, the BBC, then they're more likely to sort of accept you over other people who aren't on it. You also get a mentor, and essentially my mentor works for Sky News. Now I also have a job at Sky News, and so it's a great way to network and get yourself a bit of money, a bit of experience. And you have to utilize what you get from this to the maximum, basically. So my tips for applying for it is, don't be modest. Really emphasize that you care about journalism, that you are diverse, and that you bring something to a newsroom. So they're sort of looking at what do you offer? So one of the questions they asked me in the interview was, why should we invest in you? And I took it so personally, because I was like, well, good question, to be honest. And I just sort of went like, at the end of the day, you've got to believe in someone. So, and I need someone to believe in me. So like, why don't you just give us the money, basically? And you have to just say that, basically be straight with them. Like, you know what you can bring to the table. So you know that you can bring diversity, you know that you can bring, an eye for a story and all the things that you need to be a journalist. It's just, you need the cash or whatever it is to do that. And you have to sort of be blunt in that way. And it was a very odd experience, but you do have to just be straight up and, not try and dumb yourself down or sort of like minimize the adversity that you face in life. You actually have to like big it up more than anything else, because it does impact you and your chances. So they're my sort of top tips for the JDF. But there are other bursaries available if you want to apply for more, or you don't get the JDF. So at the minute, the Guardian's Scott Trust bursary is open for applications, and that's for anyone from an underrepresented background, and they'll put you through your master's degree. So that can include City University in London, if you want to go there, and it's also for other universities like Sheffield. And that's really, really good. And you just have to show that, you are diverse and underrepresented in journalism. So it can be for any range of factors. And I think they also offer work experience with the Guardian as well. So, I mean, that's pretty cool to have in your back pocket by the time you finish a degree. And then also the University of Sheffield has over 100 £10,000 scholarships for students, either undergraduate or postgraduate, and so that can be for journalism degrees and courses. And if you don't know, the University of Sheffield is actually like one of the best in the country for journalism, so definitely consider applying here, and I can't recommend it enough personally. There's also at the University of Sheffield, which I will point out, I'm not just plugging Sheffield. Sheffield's actually pretty good for funding as opposed to some of the other universities that offer journalism. So Dan Walker, who was on the BBC, he came here for his undergrad and postgrad in journalism, and he has a scholarship for broadcast journalism. And I think last year that was 10 grand and living costs, but I'm not entirely sure. And I'm pretty sure that's going to be opening again this year. So keep an eye out for that. And then there is the Lyra McKee bursary. So that's not for like a master's or anything like that, but it's really, really good training with the industry. And you get mentored as well. And I think a lot of the people who've been on that have had really good job prospects after that. So if you're interested in investigative journalism, that's also a way to go to do that. Then there are other ways of doing the training. So on-the-job training is offered by quite a lot of places. You just really got to go looking for it. So the Mirror, for example, I applied, didn't get it, for like basically a trainee role there, and they put you through the NCTJ course. And I think that opened in around March, but possibly earlier. So again, keep an eye out for it. The BBC has 2 apprentice schemes for journalists, and it also has production schemes and whatever else sort of technical broadcast things that they do. There's loads on the website, and they're open right now. And I think the closing date is actually the 14th, I think. So definitely have a look at that and apply. They're really good. And essentially they pay you for 2 years to work with the BBC, and you get a job at the end. So again, you can't turn your nose up at that. And ITV has a similar traineeship, and that opened last year around May time, I think. I'm looking at my phone because I did have it written down. but it might open earlier or later. It just depends. I think COVID has kind of messed the schedule up. So look around for that, definitely. And with the ITV one, it's 6 months, and then you do generally get a job at the end, but it's not like promised or anything. And then there's the Times and Sunday Times. That's a really difficult one, I have to say. But it's be great if you get on it, because you get to work for them, I think, for about a year. They pay for your NCTJ qualification, and the training on the job, and you basically rotate around the Times and Sunday Times on different desks and get loads of experience. So that is pretty cool. So definitely keep an eye out for all of those. And I find them on Twitter. So I'll talk a bit more about Twitter later, but I find generally everything like this on Twitter and sometimes LinkedIn as well. So I mentioned about work experience before. It is really important. I won't underestimate it. And especially if you don't know anyone in the industry, which is essentially a lot of the people who are working class have this experience, you need to prove that you can do it. And what better way to do that than get an experience? So one thing to say is your work experience doesn't have to be like fancy. So when I mentioned that I'm working at Sky News now, that sounds really cool and everything, but I really started at a small blog in the Northeast that I now edit, and I began writing there when I was 12, and I've written for loads of various things that no one's ever heard of since then, but that doesn't matter. It literally means you can show someone when you're applying for the big fancy stuff that you've got the skills, you've got the drive and the determination. So that's really important to do. And in terms of finding work experience, essentially, I would say, like, ask around everywhere where you live. So ask your local paper, ask your local TV station, your radio station. And also, if you're interested in politics like me, I did work experience with my local MP, and it was invaluable. And I think, would I be working at Sky? I basically researched for the political programme on a Sunday. I did do a politics undergrad, but I also referenced the fact that I worked in an MP's office for a week, as like I know how it all sort of goes on in terms of that situation. So it's really good to try and, if you want to, like, get experience not just in journalism, but things that, so if you're interested in health journalism and stuff, go down sort of those avenues. I would also say social media, as I mentioned before, is like your best friend as a journalist. Twitter is unbelievable. Follow as many people on Twitter as you can and interact with them. You don't have to beg them for a follow back, just like quite a few of their tweets and they'll get the hint and follow you back. And basically, most things I've ever gotten in my life, I've gotten via a Twitter DM. Don't be shy. Message people who follow you on Twitter and say, oh, do you know of any work experience going, any freelance shifts, etc. So do that. And you can also do it on LinkedIn. So I haven't really used LinkedIn for this, but I do know people who have, and it's been successful. And they just find journalists who they admire and who they like, and DM them on LinkedIn asking for any sort of advice or any shifts. And people will generally be happy to point you in the right direction. So do not be afraid of asking. And again, as I mentioned before, work experience does count if it's your own podcast, your own YouTube, your own blog. So don't be afraid of doing that. In terms of podcasts, when I set mine up, I used a software called Anchor, and that was really good because it just was really easy to use and it automatically uploads to Spotify. So that's great. And a YouTube channel, obviously everyone can set one of those up and it's really easy. And when I did it, I just basically got I started explaining complex political topics basically and put them on YouTube. It doesn't matter if you get 0 views because it's, again, showing your initiative and your experience. So like, don't be shy and just go out there and do as much as you possibly can. And basically the way that I started with my experience was this way. So I wrote for loads of websites. I think I've written now for over 40 places, and like, that's not essential, but the fact that you've got a varied history of bylines is brilliant. So Beep is the site that I edit. Again, it's not a shameless plug. We accept pictures and articles from literally any young person who wants to be involved in journalism and sharing their opinions. So there is the lovely website there if you want to, and also get in touch with me if you'd like to write for Beep as well, because we're always looking for new voices and new writers. And there are also loads of other brilliant places where you can write for, and it is free, but it's also experience that you need. So Empowered Journalism is one of those that a lot of people are writing for now, and I think they sort of take any topics at all, similar to Beep. There's Galdem, and that's for people of colour, also from marginalised genders. They're brilliant, really, really good. So if you fit into that category, definitely send them a pitch. And I think, I'm not sure if they pay actually. I think they might do. but definitely check that out. Then there's Backbench. I was a commentator for Backbench, so I used to just send my opinions in on politics. And then I became general editor, which again has been invaluable experience that I can whack on the CV and say to people. So if you're interested in politics or current affairs and commentating on that, then definitely do that. And if you write often enough and you apply for a higher up role as an editor, you're well in because you've been writing for them and they know that you're good. So definitely look at them. The Independent, that's also another one that a lot of people are writing for, and it's very trendy and it gets a lot of traction. So have a look at them. And if you're at university, just write an article or two or more if you want for your uni paper and magazines. I mean, when I was doing my undergrad at Durham, I think I wrote one article in 3 years for them. So it doesn't matter if you're not really involved. Just if you get the byline, you can write it down on your CV and stuff. So definitely just get involved with as many things and places as you can, so that when it comes to applying for jobs, uni applications and stuff, you've got plenty to say. So I know commissions is a huge topic for people, because it's kind of like, where the hell do you find one? So I started freelancing and getting paid properly in 2016. And how I did that was I went to New York with my school. I came back and I wrote a travel article about how lovely New York was, and Googled every single travel blog under the sun, and essentially sent this article to them, just wanting to get another byline, not thinking I'd get paid for it. And anyway, I didn't get paid for that article, but a couple of days later, I got an email from the guy who ran the blog that took the article, asking if I wanted to be editor of the blog. And I was like, yeah, because he said he'd pay me. So he paid me. He also trained me up on SEO, which, if you don't know what that is, it's basically a big buzzword in journalism at the minute, because journalists are expected to know how to get their articles big traction on Google, basically. So that was fantastic. And I also ended up getting just so much work, and it was like 20 to 25 pounds an article for 2 years during my A levels. And from there, I just sort of began networking again on Twitter with people, just following people. And you'll find that often nowadays, a lot of people are posting that they're looking for pictures. And they'll tell you how much they're going to pay you for them as well. So if you're sort of looking for people to follow, just literally go on Google and find the editors of, certain news desks or culture desks, art desks, whatever it is that you're interested in, on all the variety of newspapers and things. And, you can ask them, you can send them pictures, basically. There's also Journo Resources, which is fantastic, and they send out like freelance opportunities. They send out jobs of all levels, so entry-level jobs as well. They're fantastic. And again, when you are Googling for people's Twitter handles and things, most organizations, like I know the Independent does, New Statesman does, and there will be loads of others, but they have email addresses on their websites for people who are like the editors of certain desks. So if you want to write an arts article for the I newspaper or whatever, their emails online, get it and pitch them it. And I would say, when pitching for a commission, have a portfolio ready. Your CV is good as well. Have a CV and send them that too. But I do feel like when I started sending people my actual website, people were genuinely more inclined to give me things, because I think it's nicer and for people to just click through a website and have a scroll. So, and on there, obviously, you upload all your articles. And on mine, I have like an about me page, and I, wrote a nice little life story about myself on there. And I've got, different pages sort of demonstrating what I've done. And so that is a really good way of getting commissions, because people definitely do take you more seriously when you have a website. So for my website, I use WordPress. Other people use Wix, I think. And there's also Muckrack, but you just sort of upload your articles on Muckrack. So if you want a proper like website that tells a story kind of thing, I do recommend WordPress for that. So yeah. And that was a really quick what's the word again? I can't remember, but it was a really big whistle stop tour of how to get money, how to get, experience and stuff. And so now I guess the next thing is just to ask for any questions. And I've written some little prompts there in case you're not sure what to ask, but you want to ask something. So please do just feel free to do that. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. I hope it wasn't too much of an info dump.
That was so helpful, because I remember when you pitched this, I did think there is just not enough information out there for working class journalists. Everyone is just like, use your connections. But as you said, if you're working class, odds are you don't have those connections, because a lot of the time it's like middle class people who their parents know someone or something. What have you found, apart from Twitter, what do you think is the most important way, or the most like successful way that you can make a connection?
I definitely think, oh God, apart from Twitter, difficult. I do love Twitter. I do think LinkedIn is a good way of doing it, to be fair, like, because like there are like proper big journalists on LinkedIn. And so there are a few people I've found sort of from ITV. I just sort of put the name in, and you can send them, if you send them a connection request, you can be dead cheeky and like actually alter what the request is. So you can be like, oh, I'm like looking for this, you know what I mean? So you can like pitch yourself there before you even get a connection. And some people just have like their DMs open, so you can do that. So that's like that's like Twitter but on LinkedIn, essentially. But I do think, again, making connections, you can't go wrong. Emailing your local newspaper, they're usually really happy to help you because you're local and you're from there. So, you know, definitely reach out to them. And generally speaking, people are more than happy to help.
That's so good to know. And I completely agree. Like this industry, I know recently on Twitter there's been a bit of like discourse about young journalists not being helpful, but most of the time people are really lovely and willing to help however they can. I'm just for recording purposes, to make it easier for myself, I am gonna ask you to stop screen sharing. But I made a note of the questions that you have that you'd written down there. So if there's any other questions, you can put them in the chat, but I'll just go through the ones you had written down while we're waiting. What do you think is the best way to kind of construct a pitch?
So I definitely think you have to be concise, because generally the people who you're pitching to are not people with loads of time. So they just want to know briefly sort of what the idea is. And I would say try and get that down to like about 2 or 3 sentences max. Then they want to know sort of why them. So you've got to butter them up a bit and say like, oh, I think it would really suit their audience or whatever. And then finally, I always end with like a bit about me. So what I've generally started to do when pitching now is say that I get the JDF bursary and mention it's because I'm working class, because there is, like, if you're being perceptive, there is a bit of a shift going on in news at the minute, I think. And definitely people want to have people from these backgrounds involved in what's going on. So definitely when you're pitching, if you're from this background, do drop in that, because it is a real sort of seller. Like it's a bit crap having to say like, oh, I'm working class, so please take my article, but it's a way of doing it, and at the end of the day you've just got to do what you've got to do. So yeah, they're my tips for that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think sometimes, I know obviously it's not ideal if you have a disadvantage, like sometimes just being diverse can be a disadvantage. You feel like people aren't going to hire you because you're working class, or because you're like a person of color, or even because you're a woman sometimes. But in some cases it can actually work in your favor if you kind of emphasize, which is with the way things are changing. And it's nice that the industry finally is taking the step in the right direction. We've had a question from Jenny, who has said, I was just wondering how it works with freelance shifts. How do you get them? Are there any prerequisites to them?
Yeah, so with freelance shifts, that's quite interesting, because I was actually talking to someone at Sky News the other day, and someone asked them about that. And essentially, they don't really advertise freelance shifts. So you've got to find someone and ask them about it. So that was the same as how I ended up at Sky. So as I said, obviously my mentor was from Sky News. So I said, are there any shifts going, any jobs, whatever. So again, it's about networking, and networking does feel sometimes like you're selling your soul, but like you have to just rip the plaster off and do it. So find people on Twitter and like their stuff when they put it on, and they'll follow you back, and then you can DM them, or you can just ask them to follow you back, and they probably will, to be fair. And again, LinkedIn is a good way of doing that. But I would say, like, generally speaking, like I would recommend like offering yourself to do like the crap shifts as well, because not many people want to do those. So like they do night shifts and things like that, which might be interesting for you to do. But yeah, just make sure that you tell them that you're like willing to do anything and like you're happy to help in any way. So the prerequisites of that as well, I would say, are experience, because they're not just going to sort of have you if you haven't got any experience. So the list of places that I had on the PowerPoint there of, you know, places to just send articles to is a great way of doing that. And you can practice, you know, your news writing skills or whatever it is that you're going to go on to do shifts for, if that makes sense.
I thought that was a really great part of your presentation when you were talking about student media, because I think it can be really easy to dismiss student media as a valid form of work experience, but it definitely is. Like, you're still building on your skills in writing, and that a lot of them actually like are quite respectable places. Like, people in the industry are aware of student publications. And on night shifts, real quick, if you're anything like me and sometimes you feel a bit nervous when you're going into a group of big people, night shifts can be slightly easier because a lot of the time it's a smaller team, so it's easier to get to know people, and I mean, if it's in person anyway, and a lot easier probably to then make those connections, and because it's just a little bit less overwhelming. We've had another question in. Northeast journalist here, just finished my master's. What's your view of the writing scene up here compared to somewhere obvious like London?
Yeah. So I'm in Sheffield at the minute, but I often go home and would love more than anything to be able to never have to move away from home, because it's sad that you do. And so my opinion of the writing scene is it's sort of limited, but I will say that local media are more than happy to help. So I went to see Sam Fender the other month and wrote an article about it. And I thought, the Northern Echo hasn't published anything about Sam Fender the other night. So I said, oh, was anyone there? Have you written an article? And he was like, oh, no, come have yours. I was like, yeah, brilliant. So I got a byline there. So I also think the Chronicle's been pretty handy in Newcastle anyway, in terms of like the man on Twitter, he's called Gavin Forster, I'm not entirely sure. He's the editor and he followed me on Twitter. So follow him. And again, you know, do the whole thing of just trying to see if you can like bring them anything. Basically, you have to pitch to them and see, you know, if they want anything or if you can get work experience.
I really like what you said about writing from like your experience and stuff, like how you went to New York and wrote a travel article about it. Just now going to see Sam Fender and writing about it. I think that can be such a good idea for people. Like, I mean, it's obviously worked for you. So maybe for people listening, like if you're going to a gig, if you're going to an exhibition, to a gallery, to something that's just opened, or even just a place that people might not know about or that you think you can offer a fresh perspective on, yeah, it's probably well worth writing that up and then pitching it to places.
Yeah.
Do you actually, on that, I've heard a few people kind of say that you shouldn't pitch articles that are already written, but like you clearly have with the Sam Fender gig and your trip to New York and stuff. So how did you go about? Did you kind of say like, I've already got this article written, but I'm open to edits, or like how did that process work?
Yeah, so with like that kind of stuff, like the New York one, obviously been done a million times before. So I kind of, the way I just pitched it was essentially just like, oh, I've written this article, like here it is. And I attached the article because I always think like sometimes when I've written it, I can't bother to just pitch it properly. So I just do send the whole thing sometimes. And yeah, I wasn't really, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't sort of say, oh, it's a fresh perspective from me. I was just like, this is pretty cool. You know, I've been on a sort of school trip, but I did sort of make the USP of that, I guess. It was kind of like, it was narrative in a way. It wasn't like storytelling, but it was very fluffy, which I think might have been different. It wasn't just a like, oh, where to go in New York situation. But I did also, after that, write one of like the lists of places to go. So my tip on that, I guess, would be have a look at the website that you're pitching to and see if they've got a New York article, you know, and say you want to write then a list of places and things to do in New York. There's no harm in pitching that because you can actually make reference to the fact that they've got like a lovely, you know, first person piece, and it can boost their SEO. And if you say that, I'm pretty sure they'll be more than happy to have you if you mention the SEO to them, if that makes any sense.
I do love a journalism buzzword.
I know.
I'm gonna jump back to the question about kind of writing scenes differing around the country, because I know, I mean, obviously this is not helpful if you want to be a writer, but if you want to get into broadcast, radio, digital media, There's a lot going on in like Leeds and Manchester. Do you have any experience with kind of bigger organizations, but that are like based regionally, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so at the minute, what's really doing my nut in is a lot of the places at home are like not opening. So for example, I'm trying to get in with the local BBC and the local ITV, but they're not having anyone in at the minute because of COVID. So it's really annoying, but they are more than happy to help. And I do think that the radio stations are actually pretty good. So not necessarily just the BBC ones, but like I don't really know what it's like everywhere else, but at home we have like Stephen Carron's breakfast show, and I'm pretty sure that they'd be more than happy to sort of have people in, or at least to like try and help them out, because I definitely have been sort of, people have said to me from there like, oh, let us know if you want to do anything, and we'll be happy to help. So in terms of that kind of stuff, yeah. But I think there's also quite a lot of small, like not really much heard of radio productions around, like little tiny ones around the country. I think just the other week there was a one called like Radio Gateshead or something, and like I have no idea who listens to that or what it is, but like they were asking for people to sort of put themselves forward to be involved. So keep an eye out for like the really small ones as well, because they generally also need you to help them as well.
Yeah, it's really great advice around local BBC or like regional stations, especially with radio, because a lot of them have this thing called BBC Upload where you can send in any bit of media. I don't even think, like, if it's a written piece, I think you'd be able to read it out, but it's this segment where you submit whatever, and if they like it enough, they'll have you on the local show to talk about it, which
Yeah.
I submitted something last year and was really surprised when like 2 months later they contacted me. But it was great. I got to be on the radio for like 15 minutes, and that's something I can now put on my CV.
Yeah, exactly.
Because again, it emphasizes how passionate you are about things.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's the same thing for me. Anytime I've done anything like that, when I've been on the radio, been on the telly, you just whack it on there and think, oh, that's cool, because it's also multimedia, which is something that I definitely think people are emphasizing at the minute.
I'm going to kind of give some unsolicited advice that nobody asked for, but I think awards are a great place to sort of raise your profile, especially if you're sort of struggling to make those connections. And I know a lot of them you have to pay for, and that's a load of crap. I don't think it should be that way. But even if you're freelancing somewhere, your work might be able to enter you up for awards, and there are some free ones. Like I think the Press Gazette one is free. If there are any like Asian people in this chat, the Asian Media Awards are free. I was nominated last year. It costs no money, and if you're shortlisted, you'll get to go to an event for the night. And even if you don't win, you're still in a room with loads of other people who otherwise you might never get to be in the same room as. So at the Asian Media Awards, I kind of networked to my heart's content and tried to talk to all these big names, and it's nerve-wracking, but you will be so grateful when you've done it. And then I think what's important about networking is also following up. Do you have any advice about like a time where you've met someone in person but then had to, or even online, and you've had to kind of follow up and build on that connection to make sure they don't just forget about you?
Yeah, that literally happened yesterday. We had like a talk at uni from some big dogs in journalism, and one of them basically was like, oh, like this girl who now works here, she emailed me once and we kept in touch. So I was like, okay, I'll email her and keep in touch. So I emailed her yesterday, and by like a couple hours later, she was like, oh, let's have a meeting on Tuesday. So I'm having a Zoom call with a pretty big woman. I'm not going to obviously say who she is because I know it's being recorded, otherwise I'd tell you. But like I'm going to do that on Tuesday, so that's pretty cool. And it just shows you like when people like they do say things like, sometimes I think it's a bit psychological when they're like, oh, like this happened, and they are hinting for you to do it because they really want to know who is hungry enough for it, because it is embarrassing and it is awkward to be like, hi, please like employ me and give us experience and stuff, but you have to keep following up. And literally I'm also pestering people all the time for work experience. I'm like, oh, has there been any update yet? And they're like, no. And I'm like, okay, I'll be back in touch in a month. So definitely keep pressing people who know of you for any opportunity that you can get, basically.
That is such great advice, because I also think a lot of people in the industry, while they're willing to help, they might also be really busy, and sometimes they might have the best intentions, but they might have forgotten. So absolutely no shame in chasing up. We've had another question. What are your tips for a master's application? I would also appreciate some insight into what to expect from the process if possible.
Okay, brilliant. So I applied for 3 places. So I applied for Sheffield, City, and the Goldsmiths one in London, which is a bit of a rogue one, I think. Didn't bother doing an interview with them though, because I did get my place with Sheffield before then. But in terms of advice for the actual application, you have to, again, show why you're different from everyone else. So diversity is number one. Tell them, because unis love that as well. They love diversity, the whole shebang. But also, again, you need to sort of demonstrate like why you're passionate. So what's quite good about the uni master's journalism degrees is you don't necessarily need to have loads of experience. So at Sheffield, there's been people here who I know I'm friends with that had never written an article before in their life when they got here. So it's about like, you have to tell them why you want to be in journalism. So you can't just say like, I'm really passionate about it. You have to say, I care about holding power to account, or I really, have a passion for this and I can offer a unique insight to this. So it's definitely like, what's your unique selling point, I feel, when you're applying for an MA. And in terms of what to expect from the process, so at Sheffield, I sent my application, which had a cover letter in, and they did ask for, no, they didn't. I think they said if you have articles that you've written and things, then send those to them, and that your CV, and they need a reference as well. Some places need 2 references. And then for City, and then you get an interview. The interview was really nice, but some people said it was also really scary, but it just depends on who you got from here. With the City one, I have to say the interview, I felt like I was in like an Oxbridge interview. Is like, they were like trying to test you, really, really, really try and like not catch it out, but they want to like, it's like the whole thing when you apply for Oxbridge and they say that they're going to ask you. I haven't applied for Oxbridge, to be fair, but this is what they tell you, isn't it? Like, they aren't trying to catch you out, they're just trying to see how your brain works. And that's definitely what City was like when I was applying. So they were asking me questions like, I had said I wanted to do this investigation because I was applying for an investigative journalism, and they're like, but what if you broke the law? And I was like, I don't know anything about the law at this moment in time. So it was kind of like, you have to just respond on the spot, but like, don't worry about it too much in advance. And I said that because I did get an offer and I thought I'd absolutely messed it up. It's more just they're trying to like work out how you think and how you sort of naturally act as a journalist, because some people can be really bullheaded and just go in and break the law, upset loads of people. So like, yeah, just trust your gut, I think, is a good thing for MA applications. And also ask journalists, ask people like that to read over stuff. Again, like if you've got a connection on Twitter, like, oh hi, I'm applying for this, I'm just wondering if you'd mind reading it over. Or if you've got my email, you can actually ask me and I'm happy to help with stuff like that as well, if anyone wants that.
That's such great advice about kind of keeping it in your head, that, or get it out of your head that you failed for all interviews, not just like university or course ones, but for job interviews. Like my second ever job, I was surprised I even got an interview in the first place, thought I messed up really badly. By some miracle, got a second interview, and then I ended up getting the job. Like sometimes, yeah, like you said, they are just trying to see how you think and what your process is for things. They're not always trying to catch you out, because at the end of the day, like, they want you to succeed. They're not out to get you or anything. This is also last call for questions. If you have any burning questions, we've just got one in the chat, that's exciting. What advice would you give to a university student who would like to be a foreign reporter and would like to freelance in that area?
Okay, I sort of feel similar to you on this one, because I wouldn't turn down a foreign reporter job. So I guess, again, like, you do have to start regional generally and like start low. So don't like expect to just get work experience on like the foreign desk somewhere. So get involved with your local paper, get involved with the uni papers and stuff. Definitely get involved with uni papers. And actually I've just read that I think means that you're a university student. So definitely like get involved with your student paper and write about like foreign affairs essentially. Also, no harm in setting up your own blog doing that, or do what I did and like make a YouTube. And I did like a run through basically of like what inauguration day in America was going to be like, just it was like 4 minutes long or whatever, and there's like no harm in doing things like that. So definitely you have to start small before people will take you sort of as a credible source to commentate on it. So like now I do feel like I'm in a position where if I wanted to sort of do like a foreign sort of reporting thing, now that I've got like the experience, it would be a lot easier for someone to turn around and be like, oh yeah, you know, she's all right because she's got, you know, all of the other stuff out of the way. So I hope that is helpful. Yeah.
I kind of have a follow-up sort of on starting from the bottom. How do you go about pitching when you've got like zero experience?
Yeah, so like for me, it was just I just used to say like I'm really passionate about this and I would just love the opportunity to. But that's again why you have to, if you've got no experience, that's why you have to begin at like places like Beep, for example, which is what I edit. Because that like for us, I know you don't need any experience whatsoever. And I think it's the same for Empower Journalism and the Independent. So you just say like you've got an interest in this and you really want the opportunity to share your view, and you know you would just love to have the opportunity and the chance. And I think people also sort of quite egotistically enjoy giving people a chance because it makes them feel nice. So I think it sort of works like that as well. But yeah.